You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 71, Speaking French and Polish. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast and conversation with multilinguals. Today, I'm so happy to welcome Heather, the host of the Future is Bilingual podcast, for a conversation about her languages of French and Polish. In this episode, Heather and I talk about learning languages here in the US and how many of us here have a disconnected relationship with the French language. Heather talks about how she became a Spanish and French teacher and what it was like teaching these languages in the same school year. We compare some grammar of Romance languages in this conversation since Heather is currently learning Italian, and we talk about her journey with Polish on her own and with her family. And since Heather is also a mom, she talks to us about raising her children bilingual and shares some funny stories of her kids' adventures with mixing languages. Heather is currently working toward a PhD in education with a focus on societies, cultures, and languages, and I hope you'll all join me in wishing her luck in her studies. Links to the Futures Bilingual podcast can be found in the show notes of this episode. If you enjoy this episode of Speaking Tongues, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, or like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now support the show on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Heather. How are you today, Heather?
I'm doing very well. How are you, Elle?
I'm fantastic, and I'm so happy to talk with you. So happy always to have a conversation with a fellow podcaster, and so happy to talk about your languages of French and Polish today. So
thank you, and I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah.
Be on the show because I love listening to all your episodes. So it's exciting to be one of the interviewees.
Yes. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
Okay, so my first language is English. I'm a native English speaker. I did grow up hearing two accents. My father's from South Africa, so I was aware of the world and other ways of speaking. So he didn't have a very strong accent. He kind of lost it, but he still says like tomato, bathroom. So that was always a point of like discussion in our house, and our friends would comment on his accent. But yeah, just native English speaker. My parents do speak. My mom speaks Hebrew and my dad speaks Afrikaans, and I've always reproached them for not teaching us those languages. But no, just English. My mom did speak a few words of Hebrew when I was little, and we learned how to read in Hebrew school attended for a year and then quit. So a little bit of Hebrew, just like little things like Laila Tov is good night, B'tei Avon is like bon appetit. And she would also say things in Spanish. My mom also speaks Spanish, so she would say like hasta mañana, or like just little things. So I've always had this curiosity with languages just because they've always kind of been part of my life. It's never been English only. Like I've always known about other cultures, but the first language that I learned to speak fluently was French. And that's because I took it, middle school, high school. Didn't get really fluent until probably college and then living there. I've also studied Spanish, Polish, a little Korean, just because I had Korean friends in university. I did some Arabic at university in the US and in France. And then just with traveling, I did some Greek, some Japanese, and I've now started Italian, which I know is one of your languages. So that's my newest little baby language, which I love.
Brava.
Grazie.
That's really cool. And I love that. So you grew up in the US, right?
Correct. New England.
And I think that you tell me what your thoughts are on this, but I feel like a lot of us who grow up in the US, if we don't have exposure to languages through our heritage and our parents, our grandparents, etc., we don't really have any type of other exposure to language outside of school. And I don't think a lot of us really grow up with that curiosity about
Yeah.
learning languages that aren't heard in our home or in our community.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I think there's a lot of uh, big bubbles where it's only English. You'll only hear English spoken. So different from like Europe, where they hear English, songs and there's movies. Like we don't have that. Everything we have is just America. It's all,
Right.
we're not like taking in news from around the world. We're not watching movies from other countries per se. So, if you're not growing up in like a community that, like you said, you have like a heritage language, like there's like a big, let's say, Portuguese population or Spanish speaking population, I think it is very easy to grow up with English only.
Right. Right. And
And it's such a big country. It's, I can't speak to the whole country, but I think, we're far from other countries unless you're on a border town or, close to Canada. But even then, so much of Canada is English speaking. You'd have to be like right near the Quebec border to really
right.
feel the French influence.
Right. And I say that all the time. Like I always think it's easier for people outside of an English speaking country to learn English because there is just so much information out there. Like you said,
Mm-hmm.
it's in,
Mm-hmm.
everything that gets consumed. And then for us, it's so hard to even find international news that doesn't involve war or poverty or
I so agree. And I
yeah,
hate starting my morning with that, which is I have this like love-hate relationship with the news because you wake up and I don't want to hear about death and war at 6 a.m.
right.
But I want to know what's happening. So I'm like, how do I
Yeah.
balance? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like, where are the kitten up a tree stories in Brazil
Mm,
that we hear on
yeah.
the international
Well,
news?
I think there's more internet stuff coming out that will do those like good news stories. And
Right,
but
right.
yeah, it's not, yeah, it's hard to get international. I feel like maybe it's not hard, you just have to know, but it's very easy to ignore it. It's very easy to just live your little bubble.
Yeah, yeah. You have to be dedicated to find,
Mm-hmm.
and
Or know people or yeah, have
ex
connections somewhere.
exactly. So in your community, and you're in this lovely language melting pot in your home with your
Mm-hmm.
family, where did you see representation of other languages outside of your home in your community or with your friends, your peers, etc.?
Mm-hmm. I didn't really growing up. I didn't really think about it. Like I knew we were like the weird ones. I mean not weird ones. There were obviously people like everybody has like, oh well, I'm 75% Italian and 15% Irish, whatever they but like nobody would speak those languages. They were just like, oh, my nonna, came from Italy or whatever it is. But yeah, it wasn't, I don't know, it just wasn't really represented. I grew up in a very small white suburban town.
Mm,
So there wasn't a lot of representation in general. It's like very Irish, Italian, Catholic. That was kind of the majority of the people,
okay.
which
Sounds
I'm
like
not. So we always felt like, oh, there's like a few minorities, like a few Black kids, a few Asians. Like we were like, we always joked like, oh, I'm African American, but I'm not. My dad is from British descent. So
right.
it was kind of like a joke, like, oh, can I say I'm African American?
That's
No.
funny. That's
As
funny.
kids, kids, I think in America, we talk a lot about that. Like, what percentage are you?
Hmm.
Because everybody is an immigrant unless you're, a First Nation. And I just remember that being a topic where everybody kind of knew their percentages and, they had a grandma from this, a grandfather from this country.
Yeah, that's such a uniquely American thing, I think.
Yeah.
And it's weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's
I'm
like a middle school, like kids like to compare. Like, well,
yeah.
oh, I'm more Italian than you are, two of my
Yeah,
grandparents come from there. And
it's funny. I went to high school and there were a number of Irish American and Italian American students in
mm-hmm.
in my school in my class, and none of them spoke Italian
Oh yeah, yeah.
standard or the regional
Dialect. Mm-hmm.
language that they're from. There was one kid who, because we went on a class trip to Italy in a few years ago. It was a while ago. We went on a class trip. I mean, this was in the 90s. So we went on a class trip to Italy,
Mhm.
and this student was on the trip, and he was the only person who could converse in standard Italian
Um,
with, local Italians. And I remember thinking like, wow, like for all of the talk that we do about where our family is from and where our heritage is from, like the language just never comes with it. And I just think
yes.
it's
Yeah, my husband has his own version of that because he moved here when he was 14 from Poland, and he moved to a very Polish town. There's a lot of Polish immigrants, or just descendants. So there was a ton of people with Polish last names.
mm,
And, first names can sometimes be the same. And he was like, oh, great. Like everybody here is Polish and nobody could speak Polish.
oh wow.
And like they were all like third generation or, like they just lost Polish. So he would like see, he would know their names and be like, oh, you have this last name, and they couldn't speak Polish. So he found his small group of friends that we're still friends with who had also recently come over that still, could speak Polish because they grew up there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very uncommon. I think it's gaining more popularity now. I know we're going to talk about raising bilingual and multilingual kids, and I think it's very in right now. It's very popular. It's very, I don't know, or maybe that's just the circle that I'm in, so I'm seeing it. But even like, I know that they talked about Kate and whatever his name, like how their daughter speaks Spanish because her nanny is Spanish, and oh my God, she's bilingual. Like this was years ago when she was little. But it was like, yeah, every immigrant child is also bilingual, but nobody's putting them on the cover of Time and talking about it. So I think, it's just, yeah, it's getting a little bit more popular. So I hope in the future when my kids are in school, maybe there will be more kids that also have a heritage language that have, been
Right.
raised in two languages so that or two or more. Just yeah, I hope that that's the whole premise of my podcast was like, I know there's parents doing it, not in my friend group. So like I wanted to reach out and find parents around the world that are doing this because we're kind of spread all around the world. I have
Yeah.
friends with kids, but none of them are speaking another language to them. So it can be a little isolating.
That's what we have to do now. We have to find our tribe, like
Exactly. And the
wherever they're
internet is wonderful.
exactly. It's so helpful.
Mhm.
Um, I want to ask, so you started learning French when
Mhm.
you were in school. Why French?
French. So the options were Spanish or French.
Okay.
I have an older sister, and I said my mom speaks Spanish, and my mom was a nurse, and she would use Spanish often. We have a big Spanish-speaking population where I live, and she was like, "You should do Spanish. I speak Spanish. Your sister took Spanish." And I was like, okay, it's French. This is 11-year-old me. I was like, no, I'm going to do French. But it turns out like I felt deeply in love with French. It's still my favorite language of all the languages I've ever, even looked at thinking, I love French. I love the way it sounds. Um, there's many beautiful languages, even ones I don't understand, like Greek, I feel like is such a beautiful language. And
Yes.
um, I still come back. French is like the language of my heart. I just love it. And now that I speak it fluently, it's part of my identity. It's part of who I am.
Mm.
But I'm very happy that I that I went against my mother's wishes and took French.
It's so funny, and I'm gonna get to my next question, but I have to just say this. My mother also wanted me to learn Spanish, and um, I never had at a young age, I guess middle school,
Mhm.
I didn't even have an option for French, but I wanted to take French so badly from when I was in middle school.
Wow.
And my parents were like, "Don't waste your time.
Oh.
Learn Spanish." I don't know if I told you this before, but
Mm-mm.
I
No. And
never remember who I told this story to.
yeah.
But my mom really wanted me to learn Spanish because, we were growing up in the Bronx,
Yep.
and there's a lot of Spanish speakers in the Bronx. And my mother just thought that it would be more useful. And I was not interested. I didn't have a choice. At the end of the day, I did have to take Spanish. That was all that was offered to us. But I was very defiant in
Hmm. And that breaks my heart. So I am a French and Spanish teacher,
Mhm.
or I was, and then my daughter was born, and I took time off. But I would have parents come in for these, parent teacher conferences, and I've had some students that were in Spanish with me, but their parents came in and said, oh yeah, she wanted to do French, but I told her it's useless. And they didn't know I also taught French. They just knew me as their daughter's Spanish teacher.
Right.
And it just broke my heart. I was like, please don't tell me that. I only teach Spanish because they make me teach Spanish. But, obviously I would never tell the parents that, I was like, oh yes, of course,
Yeah.
of course, Spanish is so much more useful. And it is. And yeah, I mean, it depends. It totally depends. I think personally, I'm very happy I learned French first. And I always tell students if they come to me and they say like, oh, I don't know which one to do. I always say take French first because you get the pronunciation, which is very hard. And then Spanish is an easier pronunciation because you just pronounce everything you see. So
Right.
I always feel like students, if they're, on the fence or they're interested in French, they should go with French first because yeah, it's a much, I don't know, trickier pronunciation. And the people who've done Spanish first and then they try to go to French, they still get caught up in the extra letters and the silence, like all the silent letters. And I don't know. I just think it's good. Like when you're in middle school, like start with French, your brain is still younger and you can
Viable.
and and also I learned Spanish so much easier because I knew French. And I just don't think it works as well the other way. I feel like people who speak Spanish don't necessarily always learn French as easy. I don't know why that is. Or maybe it's just that like us French people have to learn Spanish. A lot of the French teachers have to do some classes in Spanish.
I have a theory, and it's probably total nonsense, but
Well, so is mine.
I have a theory. I think because I had to take these couple years of Spanish in middle school, and then in high school I took 4 years of Latin, and then when I got to college I took 2 years of Italian, and I had no real classroom contact with Spanish when in a span of 4 or 5 years, right? But when I started taking my Italian class in college, I was using a Spanish pronunciation. So my theory, which is complete garbage, is that I think because we are so exposed to Spanish everywhere in some way, that I think it gets into our minds, and we're not exposed to French at all
Yeah.
in this country. I think it's very rare that we're exposed to French, like you said, unless you live close to a border of, a French-speaking part of Canada. But I think that maybe, and this is why I don't really totally believe what I'm saying, because I live in New York City, and Spanish is by far and large the second language of New York City. So I step out of my house, I get on the train, I hear Spanish, I see signs on the train in Spanish, I hear music that people are playing in Spanish. I go to certain neighborhoods and there are signs in Spanish. There are, it's everywhere. I don't see anything in French. So I think it's getting into my mind. I'm picking it up somewhere. And I think a lot of people are, maybe no matter where you live, because there are Spanish speakers everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that has part to do with it as well.
Yeah. And I personally, just now starting Italian, I found that Spanish will help me, like my pronunciation. French with like vocab helps, but then I feel like, yeah, my pronunciation is more towards the Spanish way because you need to do the R's and all that stuff. It's not the French. But yeah, I love Italian. Can I just say how much I love Italian? Because I know you also speak Italian.
Yes.
It's so fascinating to me because I'm a French and Spanish speaker. It's like they both are like helping me. They're like combining their forces. And I'm like, oh, I understand like almost this whole thing because I take a little from French and then I take a little from Spanish.
Right.
It's so cool. It's just, I don't know. I don't know why I waited so darn long to start Italian. It's such a beautiful language.
Do you think that it's easier than French and Spanish? Because I do.
You do? Okay. So I am discovering that I feel like there's more grammar. I don't know, like all the combinations, how you can make there's just more of them. So like in French, there's like O, like ale becomes OU, and then ala doesn't change. But like I saw the list. I had this amazing book that was like comparing French, Spanish, and Italian. I don't know if there was another language, but it was comparing those three. Yeah, it was just comparing the grammar of those three. And like the table that showed all the combinations for Italian, I was like, oh, whoa, this is a lot more than just like than just French or Spanish. So I don't know. I mean, I'm still getting into the grammar. I haven't really done all the tenses. Romance languages in general are like so tense heavy. Like
Right.
I know I just need to like study verbs, verbs, verbs. Like that's my focus. I
Yeah.
verbi.
Yeah.
But I haven't like delved into it as much as I want to.
hmm
Um, but yeah, so far I'm seeing things with like articles are kind of more complicated in Italian.
Oh yeah. Good
But
old
that's just
articles.
good old articles. I mean, it just seems more than French and Spanish, at
hmm
least for now.
I almost started telling you about my woes with French, but we'd be here for a while. Because I find that French articles are confusing. Like, how do I explain this? So when you're trying to say like I went to the store and I bought some eggs.
Oh, the sum. Mhm.
Yeah, like
It's the ne in Italian. The ne is just en in
yeah,
French.
the partitive articles, so
Yeah.
that's what they're called, are like make my head. I finally did figure out the difference and when to use the l'imparfait and le
Hmm.
passé composé, and
Très
I
bien.
practically threw a party
Yeah.
because it was weeks that I just was not
Hmm.
getting it. And I had a
Yeah.
conversation with someone the other day and I realized, oh shoot, I used it correctly. And I was
Yeah.
so
The
proud.
light bulb goes off. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
I think the Italian thing that has always tripped me up is the subjunctive.
Mm.
And
Yeah, they use it more. I've
right,
noticed that they use it a lot more than French and Spanish. So French is the easiest because most of the subjunctive doesn't even change.
right.
You only really have to know the irregulars. Spanish is hard because they all change,
hmm
pretty much. But like a lot of the French, you don't even hear that it's subjunctive because if it's
Yeah,
just a regular verb, you're like, okay, it sounds exactly the same. And I love that about French. I love
right.
that, even though there's different endings, so there's different, like even just present tense, there's different letters added on, but you don't hear them. So
hmm
like je parle, tu parles, il parle, like the plural e, like you don't hear all the extra letters. So
Right.
like speaking French is very easy, and French kids have to do a lot of studying to learn all the silent letters because they don't hear them. So like when you like are teaching like very little kids in primary school, there's so many like activities that they have to do for different spellings. So
hmm
like the est for he is, il a versus a being and et.
Right.
Like they mess
Right.
those things up so much because they sound exactly the same. But it makes speaking very easy. So if you're not worried about writing, you could
hmm
learn to speak French pretty easily because there's not as many changes. I feel like Spanish and Italian have so many changes and you have to hear them. There's even more because like the Italian does the feminine, the singular, plural, like they're all the same. Whereas in French, it's just like lay, like you just add like you make it plural and like it's fine. Like you don't even hear any of the plural endings. Like it's very easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like une pomme, les pommes. Pomme sounds exactly the same in that case. Like one apple, many apple, it doesn't matter. David Sedaris, I don't know if you know that author.
I love David
Yes.
Sedaris.
Okay. So he has a whole thing about learning French in one of his books. And he was like, because he lived in France with a boyfriend for some time. And he was like, I was going to the market and I didn't know if it was un or une. I could never get these genders. So I just ordered two of everything. And I was like, that is brilliant. Like, yes, because French, you don't have to know, once you say plural, it just becomes lay. There's only one plural, not like los, las. You still need to know it in Spanish.
I
Um,
am picking up that trick from
yes, David Sedaris. That's not my trick, but he's like, yeah. So he came home from the market and his boyfriend was like, why did you get so much food? He's like, I had to order two of everything.
Oh man. Oh,
Yeah.
how was your experience like learning French as an American?
Mm.
I think that I asked this question because I think that in the US we have a very Parisian centric view of the French language. And I think that in the States, there's a level of prestige that people put upon the French language, like, oh, it's
Hmm.
fancy, it's like, ooh la la, you're,
Yep.
you know.
Exactly.
um what was that what was that like? And I guess compared to the other languages that you speak or that you're learning, like
Hmm.
how is that viewed, I guess?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. And I really like that you ask it because you're so right. There is this whole ooh la la, le français. And even as a teacher, other teachers would always come in like other teachers, Spanish, science, like anybody, they would come in and be like, oh, français, baguette. And they would, there's just like this whole, yeah, stereotype. But I do find people respect French, but like they don't want to learn it. They're like, oh,
Mhm.
it's so beautiful. Oh, I love Paris. But yeah, like no, nobody, like they still won't have their kid sign up for French. They'll sign their kid up for Spanish.
Mm.
I was working in a very affluent town, and we had a good French program, but we still had 75% of the kids taking Spanish. So, classes, we'd have like one section of this class, and Spanish would have like 5 sections of the same level. So it's like a catch-22. Like we love it, but we like are afraid of it. And then we also have this whole idea that French are rude, and Parisians are just terrible people and they're a snub, and that whole like stuck up French mentality.
Yeah. It's
And yeah,
it's
but compared to other languages, I mean, people will often ask if they hear me speaking Polish, like, oh, what language is that? Oh, is it Russian? No, it's Polish. But people have always been very nice. Like no one's ever said anything derogatory or rude or anything. So,
Mhm.
but I think if I were speaking French, they would be like, oh, that's so wonderful. Oh, French is a wonderful language, a beautiful language. I usually it just ends with like, it's Polish. Like, okay. That's the end of the conversation. So yeah, I don't know. I'd have to see. Maybe I need to start speaking French out more often with my kids and see if people, now that we can go to parks and things.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that you say like people seem to have hold it in regard, but they don't want to engage with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the United States has a really long history with France and French culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked this question also because I've become so much more aware. I think since I've fully stepped into this language learning space, I've become so much more aware of my own biases and my own like, oh,
Mm.
I love Paris. It's amazing. I can't wait to visit again. And then realizing, but wait, there's how many francophone countries in Africa?
Oh,
There's
so many.
how
Yeah.
many in the Caribbean? We have a whole Canada to the north. Like,
Yes. Right.
and I try to be more aware of and engage more with people who speak French outside of Paris, outside
Mm-hmm.
of France, and just try to understand because I feel like people from those countries are not getting that same put on a pedestal as
Yeah.
people from
For
France
sure.
do. So it's just something that I think about a lot as someone who's learning to express herself better in the French language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree that, yeah, we're not as enamored with like, oh, you're from, I don't know, the Congo, or you're from,
Right.
Senegal. Like people aren't like, oh, Senegal, wow. Like there's just not that. And it's only really Paris. Like it's not even like if someone says like, oh, I'm from Dijon, not like, oh, Dijon. Like,
Right.
it's really Paris focused, unfortunately.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, even with Montreal, people aren't like, ooh, Montreal. It's too bad, because there's amazing places that speak French, and it's so Paris focused. It's like we're zoomed in so close that we're missing the forest for the trees.
Right. Exactly.
But the books are getting better. I can say that, back when I was studying, it was all France, France, and you need to know every city in France. But now the books are much more, for teaching, they're much more like, let's learn about different countries. Let's look a little bit at Haiti. Let's look a little bit at, this country. So that's good. They're doing like every chapter now has like a different country rather than just a different city of France.
That's great. That's great
Yeah,
to
they're
hear.
getting better. Yes, they are. Things are changing. But again, we're only we're only targeting the people that are learning French and they're interested in that. And the rest of the world that doesn't speak French is still probably focused on Paris.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, how did you get into teaching?
It's a good question. I've always liked tutoring and helping people. So I was doing that before uh, officially like studying education. But yeah, I've pretty much always known. It hasn't really been a question for me.
Mm-hmm.
I just had like my first year of college. I was undecided and I had to take what did I do? No, I actually chose education. And then for education, they wanted you to be like proficient in everything as if you were going to teach elementary school. You weren't specialized.
Okay.
And I had to I took a political science class and almost failed it. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to major in French. Like I know what I want to study. And then I switched over to French. But then I did eventually, with the French degree, I became a French teacher. Added in Spanish because people here want French and Spanish because there's not as many French classes. And then I did, I loved it. Once I was doing it, I said, okay, now I want to get a master's of teaching. So that was the second degree, was more focused on actual like pedagogy versus just like French literature. I don't actually use that much when I'm teaching. So yeah, it was much more focused on like the how, like the actual interaction with students, the relationships, all that kind of good stuff. Which I miss so much.
What is it like teaching young learners in the classroom?
It's amazing. I love students. I miss them so much. They're just, I find that the students, so I taught both, and the students that took French, they really wanted to be there. It was like they actually, were passionate about it. Whereas a lot of students, not all of them obviously, but students who took Spanish, some of them were just there because they had to be, and it was just like, let's get this, class out of the way. So I found my French students were always a little bit more motivated, and I don't know if that's just because they chose a language that wasn't like the default or what, but I just had amazing students. I can't speak highly enough of my old school and the students there. If anyone of them is listening, I miss you guys. I mean, yeah, I'm still in contact with many of them. We had taken trips to France with them, and one of them was my first podcast guest. So, yeah, I don't know. They're very dedicated, and you just like you build a rapport. So I was in high school, but I would have a lot of freshmen. And so they're like new to the school. And I'm also, a young teacher. I look like I'm 18. So that doesn't help. But I feel like that made them feel comfortable.
Right.
And just always like, letting them know, like, it's not just about the content. Like it's about building a relationship with students and a trust and like having fun. Like I would always have like music playing when they came in, and like we would sometimes listen to songs and like try and find the words. Like I'd have these little fill in the blanks, like making it fun. Like it's not these like boring tables we need to memorize. Like we're trying to understand this culture and like watching videos and making it, enjoyable. And I've been out of the classroom for 2.5 years. So you can hear how much I miss it. Oh. And I was teaching online for like part-time for a time. And it's not the same. I was like, I don't want to do the correcting. I want to be with the students. It's not at all the same. So
how did your time as a language learner influence or impact your time as a language teacher?
Okay, so this is kind of funny. I had a colleague at the job that I was at, that I was talking about, my high school that I loved. The colleague was my French teacher. So I was in one town over from where I grew up, and that teacher had worked in the school I was at as a high school student. She was my French teacher, and now she became my colleague. So that was kind of funny. She was Madame to me, and then she became her first name. So when I was a student, she was such a fun teacher. Like she had us do TPRS. I don't know if you know what that is. It's total physical response storytelling. So it's teaching a language. You're standing up, you're doing body movements, and you're doing like a motion that will help you remember the word. So that's how you would do vocab. It was very physical. And then we would write stories. We'd like work in groups and do skits, and we would like perform. So we would use the language and we'd be writing it and performing it. And we did lots of songs. And it was this thing that happened in the 90s where they were doing this TPR or TPRS. And sometimes, they would read if she read a story, we would have to do like the movements or the gestures when she said it. Like if she kept repeating a word, like we'd have to do it, whatever the gesture was. So there's like a gesture to each word, not every single word,
Right.
just like the core vocab of that chapter or whatever. So that was really, I don't know, I fell in love with French because it was such a fun class, and we just enjoyed ourselves. Like we weren't sitting taking notes all the time and studying grammar. But that being said, I failed the AP exam because because we didn't really focus on grammar. And the AP exam has changed. So if people don't know what AP is, it's the advanced placement, and it's basically worth a college credit if you pass the exam at the end of the year. So now I've gone from failing my own AP test to teaching AP, but the exam has changed. So when it was in, well, actually I shouldn't say 90s. I was in high school in the 2000s. It was all grammar. It was like grammar, vocab. It was kind of like an SAT, like very dry. And now it's more culture based. So there's these 5. Oh, it's been a while since I've thought about this, but it's like it's much more culture based, and they have to do a dialogue. There's like a set dialogue, and you have to answer the questions, and they have to present for 2 minutes on a topic. They have listening, like multiple choice. I don't know. It's very different, and it's much more fun. Like the way that like you teach the class is much better. I've spoken with my colleagues who used to teach it the old way and now teach it the new way. So like I said, very good progress has come like in the way of teaching foreign languages, at least in the US. So I'm glad I'm a teacher now and not back then. But yeah, as a student, it was like, oh, I failed this test. I still became a French teacher though, which is, to prove that it doesn't matter what grade you get. It doesn't matter what happens to you. You can always move on from that. You can always continue. And, I loved French so much. I didn't let that stop me. Like, oh, okay, I failed the French test. I'm just going to stop speaking French. I was like, no, I love French. Like, I want to go to France. I want to study abroad. I ended up living there. Like, I still was pursuing French because I loved it.
Right. I want to talk about Polish.
Yes, let's switch.
Okay.
Because I could talk about French all day, but
and I would definitely let you. But we're also talking about Polish in this episode. So I know that your husband is Polish and your husband obviously speaks Polish. When did you decide that you wanted to learn Polish, and how has that experience been?
So I decided immediately. I was like, I think that night, I think he was teaching me some Polish words. So I actually had just come back from a trip to Belgium, the first time I ever went abroad by myself, and I did volunteer work. And there just happened, it was a group of international people coming together to like do some volunteer work. And there was a Polish girl who I'm still friends with now. And she had taught me just 2 words. I don't know how we got started talking about it, but she was like, I'll teach you 2 words in Polish, which was małe, duże, small and big. And we were just working in the garden. I don't know, we had like different sized buckets. So the night I met my husband, I was like, I don't know any Polish, but I just learned these 2 words because I had like just come back from this trip. And I'm pretty sure he said he was teaching me words. So yeah, from the get-go, I was like, I want to learn this language. I like languages. So yeah, I was in college at the time. And I went to the library at my university, the University of Vermont. And I was like, okay, let me see what Polish books they have. And there was not many. And it was like a grammar book from the 1960s. So I was like, okay, let me look at this. And I'm, flipping through, and there's just like all these tables of, grammar stuff. Like Polish has cases. So words change depending on how they're used, like Latin. So I'm like looking at all these tables with all these cases, and I'm like, these mean nothing to me because I don't speak the language yet. Like, I don't know what the difference is between like chi, che, tobo. Like it doesn't make any difference to me. So now as a person who speaks it, and I, if I go back and look at tables, I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense because I already use the language. But I went in a very natural way. Like I just listened to him. He would translate songs, would speak with his family. I just started like speaking like very small phrases, and they were all very encouraging. We'd go to parties, all his friends were Polish, so like I'd hear a lot, and just like very slow and like natural. And then I went back to grammar, and I was like, oh, like I was learning like chunks, because with a language with cases, I think you really need to do chunks. Like here's a set phrase, So for example, one of the most like, famous things people always say is like, I love you. So that's koham che or koham chebie. There's two options, but koham che is the most common. But if I say I'm going with you, so again, same word, you, that would be ide stobo. So there's the word tobo. And you just have to like do it in context, because if you just look at a table and you're like, che, tobo, like, what are these two words? Like, they both mean you, but that makes no sense in my brain if I don't know how to use them.
Right. Right.
So I was just picking things up in context. Like I would just learn like a whole phrase rather than it's not a language you can really do like a vote, like flashcards, unless you're doing an entire sentence or something, because you need context. Everything changes depending on the context. And yeah, it's not, yeah, I don't know. I'm a big proponent of like the natural method anyway. Like I don't really like flashcards personally. It's fine if it works for other people. But I just want to hear it a lot and then like start to use it little by little and just get, more confident as I go. I'm also very outgoing, so I don't care if I make mistakes. Everybody has their own personality and personal way of wanting to do things. So that's just the one that works for me, is like lots of input. I listen to things on my own. I listen to so many like podcasts and things on my own time, so that I'm like ready to speak when I have a chance to speak with somebody. And like, that's the same thing I'm doing with Italian now. Like now I know how to study languages. Like, so I'm like, okay, lots of input, and then like speak a little bit when I can. But, other people aren't maybe confident or ready to speak right away. So everybody has their style.
How long do you think that it was with Polish until you started to feel comfortable, confident? Well, maybe you had confidence all along, but
no.
How long was it until you started to feel like, you're thinking and expressing yourself independently, and you're not doubting yourself and what you want to say?
Yeah. Okay. So that's two different things, because confidence, I mean, I did my first interview in Polish and I was still not confident. And that was just a few months ago. But I've been speaking like, if it's not like a recorded interview, I don't know. I need my best friend, Molly, who is my timekeeper of all of my memories, because she knows my whole life in detail. Let's see. It was probably a few years. I was also not focusing on it. So that's another difference, is I've been studying this language so long, but it's not intense. It's not like the people that are like, I'm going to learn Spanish in a year and they go at it really intensely. Like I was just like picking it up as I went. I was doing my whole undergrad degree. Then I went to France, and then like, I was just kind of like still doing my whole, like I was still focused on French a lot of that time. I was also learning Korean, Arabic on my, like, I was just like, I had these little side projects. So yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. I don't know exactly when the moment was, because I wasn't paying attention to like, I guess also it's been a while though, because I would always like speak to my then boyfriend on the phone and say things in Polish, and everyone was always like, wow, like you speak Polish. Oh my God. And I was like, yeah, but you don't realize we say the same 5 things to each other when he calls. Like, hey, what are you doing? Yeah. Okay. I'm just doing this. Okay. Yeah. Call me later. Like, have a good night. It's just like, it sounds very fluid. And I'm like, yeah, because I've said that like 17,000 times. So I don't know when the exact moment is, but yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's a process.
It is a process. So where are you now with Polish? You can have conversations, you can, get around town
definitely.
in Poland, and that's great.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking it for the past 4 years with my kids has greatly improved just, I don't know, everything, like confidence and just thinking in it. Because, he was a baby, so it was like, I could take it kind of slow. And then as he's getting older now, we're using it more and more, but just my vocabulary, I've had to look up so many words. But yeah, it's a tricky question because I've never taken a test. Well, it's kind of a lie. I took part of an online test to see if I was like, I didn't know if I was B1, B2. So yeah, I think I'm somewhere in like B2. I don't know. It's hard. I feel very fluent though when I speak, but there's definitely lots of vocab that I don't know. I can still like mess up endings and get, cases wrong and things like that. So it's hard. I don't know. Confidence is the most important, right? Like just being
Yeah.
able, and it depends what situations you've been in. I've been in a lot of family friend situations. So like, I'm very confident with that. We saw friends yesterday, and one of my friends had his parents there, and I don't usually speak to them, but I was like, yeah, it was fine. Like I was speaking to his father, no problem, joking, laughing. I think joking is like getting you into like the sea level, right? Like if you can
Yes.
understand jokes, like that's pretty advanced.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were talking about these like cabaret things that they have in Poland, where there's like stand up. It's basically stand up comedy, or sketches,
Oh, cool.
which is fun. But that is, yeah, it's a whole nother level of like being able to. It's fast, like that kind of stuff. You have to
Mm-hmm. Right.
really be able to understand and then get the joke. Sometimes like I've understood the words, but I'm like, wait, I didn't get the joke. And also humor. Humor is so different from like culture to culture.
It is.
I've I've like forgotten how much it is, because I'm so like used to my husband and his, the way that they joke. But like when I see like him with around my American friends, and like he'll say something and I'm like, oh yeah, that is kind of like a weird joke to them. Like that's not like something they're used to hearing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
So you mentioned that you are the mother of two
Mhm.
and you have a multilingual household. I would love to know what you think, and you don't have to give me a thesis.
Okay. Okay.
Because I know that this is probably pretty controversial, but I would love to know, you're raising your kids multilingual, and I know that some schools offer bilingual education.
Mhm.
I don't know all of the good and bad of it, but do you think that there is any type of impact, um, or what do you think the
Mm.
impacts are on kids who are growing up bilingual and maybe having a bilingual education, and
Mm.
impact for better or for worse?
Okay. Well, I'm very much an advocate, and I'm it's going to be hard for me to play devil's advocate here and speak to the other side of negative, because I'm so pro bilingualism. It's hard to even see why someone, I mean, basically all the reasons that people say you shouldn't do it are myths. They're based on some sort of old school myth or misconception, like that students, that children will speak later. For instance, both my kids had like 20 words at 14 months. They did not speak later at all. And they had words in both English and Polish. I don't know. A lot of the negative things are not true. And there's been studies to prove that. And there's a lot more studies coming out. That's like a hot topic right now, at least in the field of bilingualism and multilingualism. So it's very hard for me to even see a negative. I feel like there's only positive. You're opening their eyes to other cultures. Kids, they have more sensitivity with their ears because they're in from 0 to 6. They're in a very language focused, just a language focused period of their life, because that's when they're acquiring their first language. So like their ears and everything, they're able to kind of play with sounds more. It doesn't get as like set when, after you're 6 and 12, there's all these little stages. But I only see the positives. It's very hard for me to even see negative. And there's all sorts of studies with like the brain plasticity, that bilingual children, they're better able to like see someone else's perspective. They're more empathetic because they're used to kind of translating and seeing things different ways, and like knowing that there's more than one way to do things correctly. There's more than one word for dog. You could say chien, perro, cane. You can say also, like they're just more like flexible and open-minded, and not as like black and white with things.
Mhm.
I mean, I only see positives. You can learn another language easier.
Do you think that do you think that views surrounding bilingual education are changing because the way that we're educating our children is changing?
Mm, I hope. I mean, there's, I don't know if I'm just more aware of it because I wasn't a parent before, but there's lots of bilingual schools, not so many in smaller towns, but you can find them. And you can also find just supplemental classes. If there's not an option at your school, you could do like a Saturday school or an after school program,
Mhm.
especially with Spanish. There's so much English Spanish, at least where I live.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping things are changing. I'm hoping that bilingualism is getting more accepted, that a lot of the misconceptions are kind of going away, because parents, they used to think it was going to harm them, back when a lot of our parents, or like when grandparents were new immigrants, the parents were told to only speak English to them, and that's how all the family languages got lost. And
Yeah.
that was such a common phenomenon. And people would say, oh, my grandfather spoke the language, but he never taught my parent, my mom, my dad, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that we're dispelling those myths, because hello, people are bilingual all over the world. You don't need to pick one or the other.
Right.
Parents can speak their home language, and then the school can speak English. The community, there's so much. I don't think we need to worry about kids learning English in the US. um, and that was just a huge misconception, and it's unfortunately still propagated. There's still doctors saying, no, you need to speak English. Your child's going to be lost when they go to school, or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And I do, in a way, I see that there is a point, and I'm doing this with my own children, where I've been exposing them to French for the past 7-8 months in preparation to move to Quebec, because I don't want them to be completely lost. I think that is a scary situation. I
Yeah.
think that they should know how to say some basics. I need to use the bathroom. I would like some water, help. Just like, there should be, they shouldn't have zero exposure. Like, oh, school will take care of English. Like, my 5-year-old knows no English. No, they should probably know greetings, talking about how they're feeling, just some safety stuff. I think that is important, which is why I'm also a French teacher. So I would feel so guilty if I didn't teach my own kids a little bit of French before they got thrown into a school system,
Mm-hmm.
in French. But I just, yeah, I think we don't give kids as much credit. We think language learning is so hard. Don't put this burden on children. Like, we don't want to, make them work too hard or something. Like, we have these weird ideas, but like, no, like, kids, they can thrive in it. My own kids with the 3 languages, they play with the different languages. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they'll, when my son doesn't know a word in French, because their French is very limited, he'll just like, he takes the ending off a Polish word. So he's noticed my daughter's name is Isabella.
Mm-hmm.
And when I speak to them in French, I change their name. So I'll say Isabelle.
Mm-hmm.
And that, they kind of know, like, okay, now mom's speaking French, or, they'll hear like the way I'm pronouncing things. And so when he doesn't know the the French word, he'll say like, oh, like one of them he said was c'est mokre, because the word mokre in Polish means wet. And he
Mm-hmm.
didn't know how to say wet. So he just said, say, it is. He does it often with the color blue for some reason. I don't know why. So blue is niebieski. And
Mm-hmm.
he loves, it's like a joke now. He'll say like, say niebiesk, but like, he'll just take the ending off to like make it French, and he'll make the French, like, he'll say it in a French accent, like niebiesk. Like, he tries to, like, I don't know, it's very cute.
That's adorable.
But they play like they're, like, they think it's funny, and like they'll, I don't know. And their French is very limited. Their English is much better,
Mm-hmm.
thankfully. But yeah, they'll still, like, they'll play, like, he rolls his R's, which he's only 4. He's been rolling his R's for like a year. I don't know why. He just likes to do it. So he'll be like Robert, which is a bike. But like, he like really plays with it. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I think we just don't give kids enough credit, and like, we have our own misconceptions and past
Yeah.
with learning languages. Most of us, everybody I meet, they're like, oh, I took 20 years of French. Oh, I took French in high school 50 years ago. I don't remember anything. And like,
Mm-hmm.
everybody, that I meet tells me something that, I failed, I didn't succeed. So wonderful you're raising your kids like this. It's very common that people think it's like this magical thing, like this fluency is this unattainable unicorn that like we're never going to
Mm-hmm.
reach or something, but only kids have access to it if you start them young. There's also that misconception, like, no, my son is starting French. He started it when he was like 3.5, and I'm sure after 4 years of living in Quebec, he'll be fluent in French.
Mm-hmm.
um, so I just think, yeah, we have a lot of misconceptions about languages.
I love those stories of your kids playing between your son
Mhm.
between Polish and taking the ending off, and like
Yeah.
he's already knowing that this is um a language with cases. So
Hmm.
like it's just, their minds work in so many ways that ours have forgotten to
Hmm.
work, and we just sometimes need to get out of their way and let them do what
Yes.
they need to do.
Just another anecdote with my daughter. So she had like almost no English because the pandemic was happening and we hadn't seen family. And my mom was like, she doesn't speak English. I don't understand her. And, you can get a lot of negative um, feedback from people very close to you, my own mother. And you just have to keep going. Like, I feel like so many people would be like, oh, okay, like I'll speak English to her. But we just were like, no, she needs to know Polish because she's not going to get any exposure to Polish if we don't do it at home. And now my daughter, she's 2.5, things have opened up. My mom is able to visit and she was visiting more often. My daughter is like crazy. Like her English is so good. She'll hear something once and remember it
Oh.
and her, like, she gets the word order correctly. So my son, he still translates like word for word from Polish. So I have some examples. He says, what this is, because in Polish, "co to jest" is literally what this is.
Mm-hmm.
And he still does it. And I'm like, we keep saying to him, like, oh, what's this? What's this? And, my daughter, if she even did it once, I don't even know if she did it once, but she always says it correctly. So it's funny. Like, my mom was so worried, like, she's not going to speak English. The first couple times she would, saw her after quarantine, but like she speaks like really good English. And I don't know if it's she's younger, she's just picking it up quicker or what, or, they say girls are more advanced with language, whatever. There's
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of theories, but I just think yeah, like it's on the same page where kids are just amazing. Like if you expose them to things, you don't have to be a speaker yourself. You can get outside help. You can get a tutor. You can do classes somewhere else. But even just like listening to songs, my son, when I first started speaking French to them, was not interested. He was like, I don't understand what you're saying. Like he was like, yeah, 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 like no, no, no. And so I kind of backed off. And then we just did songs. We would just listen to songs because, they're like, okay, this is just a nice song. They're kind of listening to the melody. And I was teaching them like some basic stuff. I was also teaching French and Spanish online. So they would see me doing these repetitive songs like head, shoulders, knees, and toes, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But like now, like then I retried again in December of last year and they were more into it. So like we were doing the colors, like I would just speak to them. Like now I just have 2 days a week where I speak to them during the day. It's like you just talk to them. Like they understand now when I'm like, est-ce que vous avez faim? Vous voulez aller dehors? Are you hungry? You want to go outside? Like it's the words we use every day. So now they're just like, oh yeah, okay. Like they might not be able to say back to me more than like we, but like they understand.
Yeah.
So like
It's a
that's what I want.
start.
I want them to at least understand if their teachers are speaking to them, and they'll get there.
So I know that your podcast is, well, everybody should know. Your
Well,
podcast is titled The Future is Bilingual.
mhm.
What does bilingualism and the title of polyglot mean to you? And how do you think that we as a society, or maybe as Americans in the US,
Mhm.
people living in the US, how do you think we can work toward a bilingual future?
Mm. Yeah, so I picked that title. I started it like in the end of 2019, and there was still that phrase like the future is female. And I
Mm,
had just had a daughter, and I was like, oh, okay, I like that. It's catchy. The future is bilingual. So it just seemed to work because my podcast, my idea was to interview parents and talk about raising bilingual kids because I'm new at this. My kids were young when I started it, and I was like, I want to talk to people who have older kids and see what
hmm.
what struggles they faced and how they can help me kind of learn from others.
Yeah.
It's kind of morphed. I do other things on it now, but yeah, bilingual. I mean, I would say I identify very much as a bilingual now, as a multilingual. Um, I also identify as polyglot, but I find that word, I don't know, maybe it's just this online social media community. It's more like polyglot is almost used more by people who love languages, who are like passionate about language learning.
Mm,
And multilingual is like, that was my life circumstance. Like I grew up in Switzerland. I'm multilingual, but maybe not necessarily a polyglot. Like I feel like polyglot carries this extra meaning, but maybe this is just my own interpretation.
hmm.
But a lot of people who use polyglot, it's kind of like, yeah, I'm part of this community of very passionate language learners. I don't know. Do you see that?
Yeah. No, I understand.
And I hope my kids, at least, I don't really care what term they decide to use, but I hope that they'll at least like recognize this gift, because this was a gift that I wish I had had, as I had said earlier, that my parents were both bilingual and didn't teach us the languages for their own reasons.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like this is a gift. This is, we've given you this gift of multiple languages, and I hope that they just at least continue to use them in the future if the opportunity presents itself.
Tell us where we can find your show and where we can listen to it and
Mhm.
how we can find you on social media.
Okay, so the podcast is on all major platforms. So if you search "The Future is Bilingual," it should pop up. It's like a blue and purple picture. And the same title I have the same handle on Instagram, "The Future is Bilingual." So you can find me there. And my podcast is on a hiatus for a little bit just because it's summer and we're moving, as I alluded to. But there's plenty of episodes to listen to. So
Perfect.
feel free to check me out there.
Yeah. I will add links to your platform in the show notes. And
See?
for people who are going to look for you, they can just click and find you right away.
Awesome. Perfect. Make it easy.
I have one more question for you, but I just want to say thank you so much for having this easy flowing, fun conversation with me about your languages and about bilingualism and raising your kids. And I've had so much fun talking with you.
It has been such a pleasure. I could do this every day, which is why I made a podcast for myself, so I could just sit every day and talk to people about languages.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to hear so many different stories, and
Mm-hmm.
I know you know the same. It's like there's so many people out there and everyone has something to talk about.
Exactly.
So
And
that's
everybody's story is different. It's just so fascinating. That's why I love your podcast too.
I think that's the joy of the podcasts that we do is like
Mm-hmm.
even if you have someone who has a similar story, it's never going to be the same. So
Exactly.
there's just always going to be something to shine a light on. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm a fan of your podcast as well. So please come back. Don't stay on hiatus too long.
I won't. I've got things lined up. I'm just not as prepared as you.
So I like to end each episode with the same question. And that is, do you have any jokes, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in French or in Polish to share?
Goodness. Okay. So I'm terrible at jokes. So I will not make anyone suffer through me forgetting the punchline. Tongue twisters, I will only do when it's not being recorded.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. So I do have a very easy Polish word. I want to do Polish just because I feel like French is easier to find. You're going to have many guests who do French. So I'll do some Polish. So a very easy Polish slang word,
Mhm.
spoko.
Spoko.
Spoko means cool, or like
Oh,
it's all good. Like, yeah, that's good. Spoko.
okay.
Very easy. And another one is shema, which
Shema.
is like, hey, what's up? Like, what's happening?
Oh, I like that. What context would you use both of
Like,
those words in?
so right when you like see a friend, you'd be like, they say hey. So you could be like, hey, shema.
Okay.
So it's just like, hey, what's up? And then spoko, you can use like if someone tells you, like, oh, I'm running late, like I'll be there in 5 minutes, like spoko, like it's fine. Or like, oh, this is really cool, like, ah, the spoko. Like ala is but like they use it in a emphatic way.
Mhm.
Ale spoko. Like that is so cool.
I like that.
And I also have words of advice. I was talking to my husband. I'm like, what can I use? And then I thought of this phrase that we unfortunately have to say a lot in our family. So this phrase, this
Uh-oh.
phrase is do wesela się zagoi. Do wesela
Do vesela
się
she
zagoi.
zagoi.
Wesela się zagoi, which means it will heal by the wedding. Which is used usually like if a kid like gets a bump, you're like, like, don't worry, it'll be healed by your wedding. But I
Great.
have another story because my my sister-in-law was getting married in Florida. It was a destination wedding, and we got an Airbnb, and we're like, okay, cool, like. And then there's the lanai, which is that like indoor outdoor pool type thing that everybody has in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
which was a word I learned in my 30s.
I learned that
And
from Golden Girls.
Oh my God. Why did I love Golden Girls? I don't know why I didn't never paid attention to it then. It wasn't relevant to my life. But so my husband went to go swimming and he dove in the pool and scraped up his nose, of course, because it's, it's Florida. They have like the concrete pools. They don't need the pool liners like we have here.
Right, right.
And we were all like, because the wedding was tomorrow and it
Oh,
clearly
no.
was not going to heal. And
Oh,
it was like
no.
a sarcastic.
Oh, no.
But I also have to say it a lot to my kids because they're just clumsy. And yeah, it's one that we use often.
That's a really funny saying. I've
And
never
it's
heard
very
anything like
specific.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so specific.
Which is why I picked it. I was like, this is because many sayings exist in other languages, like, like the que sera, sera, like that exists in every language. There's many things that I like to say, like better late than never. Like that's one I use because I'm always late. But like, I feel like this one is like specifically Polish. And
Right.
there's so many good Polish jokes. I just can't tell them. I'm not Polish.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Before I let you go, do not think about this. I know you're probably going to think about it.
I already know what you're going to ask.
But you know what I'm going to say. Don't think about it. But between French and Polish, the first one that comes to your mind after we've been talking for all this time, what is the best way to say goodbye?
Okay. So I'll make it easy. Papa means bye in Polish. It's like bye-bye.
Papa?
Papa.
Oh, wow.
Which is really funny with French because that means, father, like daddy.
Right.
So like when they hear me speaking French and they, the kids, when they were first getting into French and their dad was leaving for work, they would say, Papa, Papa.
Oh my gosh.
And they were playing with the languages that way. It was very cute. Yeah. So instead of saying Papa, Tata, Tata is father or daddy. So they were doing the Papa, Papa.
I love that. That's so cute. Well, Heather, Papa.
Papa, dziękuję. Merci.
Thank you again, and I'll be talking to you soon.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.